Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm, we're having a little technical difficulty, but we're just about ready to start. I'm Paul Edelson. I'm president of the Township of Ocean Historical Museum, and welcome to this is the fourth in our series of Zoom presentations, uh, which we have had within the last year. I'm really hopeful that we have some breaks in the COVID so that maybe by next spring or maybe next summer, we'll be able to be at the rec center with people coming in live. So, but just bear with us and we'll see what happens with it. But I have a few announcements. First of all, the museum is open every Sunday from 1 to 4. And we recently, if you probably have seen in your newsletter that you just received, we're available anytime that's convenient for you. And all you have to do is either email or call the museum. We monitor the phone, even if nobody's there. Every day we'll call you back and we'll make an arrangement for you to come to the museum at your convenience. So if you wanted to come on a Wednesday night at 6:30, we'll be able to do that. And you'll be able to see everything in the museum and all the displays, right? We have been very busy at the museum. Peggy Dellinger opened in June a new exhibit, which is the aftermath of World War II and the effect it had on the nation. And the exhibit shows so many different things that you think back and you think, oh, I didn't realize that, like television, right? Like many things that we saw. I remember as a kid seeing a 10-inch television, and that was the biggest, and it was all snowy and had a test pattern. Came on at 6 o'clock and went off at 10. And we used to sit and watch the test pattern. So those are all the things that she shows, and she takes it all the way through the effects that it's had on people, on religion, everything, dress, and especially on electronics and everything that has changed. So that exhibit is there. And this past Sunday, we opened a mini exhibit on the 100th anniversary of the Wanamassa Fire Department. And that is really worth coming in to see. And we have Bruce Horn, who did a video, and it's up now, I believe, on our website. And there's a lot of interesting things that he points out about firefighting that probably most people didn't know. I didn't know that the foam that they send out, they spray you down with in a big fire, most of it's soap. I thought it was some kind of a magic elixir to put the fire out, but that the magic is soap. So that exhibit is good. Coming up on November 10th, we're having a gold sale with Earth's Treasures. It has always been very nice to have them come in. They're very good. The best thing about it is that it's a private sale. You come in, we have coffee, we have some cookies, you sit down and relax, but you go upstairs and you meet with them privately. Whenever I've gone to Earth's Treasures, you see people are trying to sell jewelry and stuff like that, and there's a counter, and there's always a nosy person like myself who edges up to see what they're selling and how much they're getting for it. Here, you come to the museum, you go up there, it's a private thing. You can take it or leave it with what they offer, and they pay you in cash and you leave. And it's a really very, very nice thing. That event is coming up, followed by on November 13th and 14th, on the porch of the museum, we're having an American Girl doll clothes sale. This is on Saturday and Sunday, and you're thinking about Christmas and things for the grandchildren or children. They've got doll costumes that have been made. Most of them they're all handmade by the quilters. And if you compare them to the prices that you pay in New York when you go to the American Doll Tea, you'll see it's fantastic. And people that came last year really came looking for the doll clothes for the holidays, and it was very, very successful. And it's going to be from 11 to 3 on Saturday and Sunday, the 13th and the 14th of November. And then following that, on December 4th and 5th, is our annual open house. This gets better every year because we combine with the town with the tree lighting. So we will be open from 12 noon. We will stay open till after 5 as the Santa Claus arrives on a fire truck, and it's great. Last year, or 2 years ago, when we had it here, there was a huge crowd. They've solved the parking problem, but there's hot cocoa and Santa Claus is there and all kinds of things and goodies to eat. And the museum will be open. Anybody that wants to come on in and see what's going on there. Okay. So those are the announcements. Let me see what else I need to tell you, though. I think that pretty much tells you everything that we need to know now. I'm now going to turn it over to Lois Kiley, who's going to introduce our speaker, Steve Carlidge, about the architecture of firehouses. And I think you'll find that very interesting. Thank you. Go ahead, Lois.
Thank you, Paul. I must say you have never lost your gift of salesmanship. I know even that you may be retired, you're the best salesperson in Ocean Township. And I do want to add to what Paul said about our current exhibit designed by Peggy Dellinger. It's really excellent. There's wonderful memorabilia of the days of the old firehouse and a log, which is intriguing. And I got to sit on the fire truck, so I was very happy with it. Drop by and see it if you haven't. It's a feast for the eyes. And now I'd like to introduce Steve Carlidge, founder and owner of Shore Point Architecture. He's our guest speaker tonight. His career in architecture spans 42 years. Very impressive. Steve grew up in Ocean Township, and now he's back in town this evening to give us a view of the complexities of designing a firehouse. And he'll also tell us whether or not the brass poles are in or not in. Did they make it to the 21st century? I'd also like to congratulate Steve because he's been chosen to design the new Asbury Park Firehouse, and you'll have an opportunity to ask him about that project and other projects related to the design of firehouses, a very interesting topic. Now I give you our speaker, Steve.
Thank you, Lois. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. As Lois said, I'm an Ocean Township boy. I grew up in Ocean Township, graduated from Ocean High School in 1975. I've not actually done a lot of work in Ocean Township, although our office is right now is in Ocean Grove. We've been here in Ocean Grove since 2001. But it's a pleasure to be here. And as Lois mentioned, the topic tonight is firehouse design. So before we get started, I just want to tell you one thing. In my 42 years, this is and we were just awarded the contract to design the new Asbury Park Firehouse, which Lois mentioned. This is my first firehouse that we've ever designed. So I'm far from being an expert, but I'm learning quickly. It's quite a challenge. Firehouses are interesting buildings. And in the case of this firehouse, we actually have a consultant who is a fire chief and an architect that used to be one of my partners who happens to be on almost every major firefighting board in the country and is an expert at firehouse design. So I'm learning a lot from him. So with that, let's start to think firehouses real quick. And since we had a little technical glitch, I'm going to have to ask Gary if he can post the first image. Or Gary, can we do that? I don't know where Gary went.
Unfortunately, I'm having a problem with that right now. So
Yeah, I had a problem too. I couldn't get them up.
yeah.
So since we don't have images, maybe we'll get them eventually. Let me just tell you a little bit about firehouse design. And let me tell you first that I'd love to be able to show you the Asbury Park Firehouse, but I'm not going to be able to do that tonight because the mayor and council in Asbury have not yet approved the design. In fact, we're still in the early stages of designing the building. Many of you know the existing Asbury Park Firehouse on Main Street, which has been there forever. It's actually quite obsolete, and in fact, the building is in such poor condition that the upper floors of the building are currently uninhabitable. So it's a real it's a real opportunity, and everyone in Asbury Park, especially the firemen in Asbury, are quite excited about having the opportunity to design a new building. The other thing I should tell you is Asbury Park is the only paid professional fire department in Monmouth County. And I say that a little tongue-in-cheek because there are some paid firemen in Long Branch now as well who work with the volunteers there. But Asbury Park has a fully professional paid fire department. The firemen actually are there on shifts, and that is their primary job, which is different than most of suburbia. As you know, most of suburbia utilizes volunteer firefighters. But here in Asbury Park, we have an entirely paid staff. So firehouses, in addition, they're mixed-use buildings. They're very complex. At first blush, you think the firehouse, all you have to do is house the apparatus. And in the case of Asbury Park, there's quite a number of pieces of apparatus ranging from smaller vehicles like the chief's SUVs to the ambulances to the rescue vehicles to the engines and pumpers and even a ladder truck, a segmented ladder truck. And so the new firehouse in Asbury Park has to be designed, and we're designing it to accommodate all 28 pieces of apparatus that the fire department currently has. We actually would like to plan for expansion, but we literally don't have any room. So the fire folks in Asbury believe that being able to accommodate their 21 current apparatus will be adequate, because new apparatus will replace older apparatus as they are able to bring it online in the city. As I mentioned, firehouses are very complex. They're multi-use. In addition to storing the vehicles, and anytime you have vehicles powered by combustion engines inside a building, you have all kinds of issues related to safety that have to be dealt with. We'll talk about some of those in a moment. But in addition to housing the apparatus, which is what everyone thinks of first, the firehouse is also a business office. The fire department actually, and the fire chief and all his staff actually maintain offices there. In the case of Asbury Park, there will be a fire prevention office where the fire prevention officer and the fire marshal will be in residence. And they actually, and I was surprised to learn this, the Asbury Park Fire Department, being an urban fire department, gets quite a bit of walk-in traffic where people come in with questions about firefighting, about fire safety, and requirements for permits or buying permits. And they also have a dispatch center where you can walk in and say, hey, I got a problem, I need help. And you'd be surprised how much traffic they get in the urban environment at the dispatch center. The other thing I learned that was quite a surprise is that you'd be surprised how many medical emergencies are dropped off right in front of the firehouse. This is another unique thing that I learned about the Asbury Park Firehouse. They rarely get through a day without someone being dropped at the firehouse who is in need of some medical attention. You think that you get an ambulance call and the ambulance rolls and you go to the destination, but in many cases there are people who don't want, for one reason or another, don't want to know that there's a problem, and who knows how the problem was created. So they throw people in the car and dump them out in the street in front of the firehouse in the hopes that the EMS folks in there will deal with the problem, and if the person needs to be transmitted to the hospital, that'll happen. So in addition to the business office, in a professional firehouse where you have paid firefighters, we have the aspect of the residential aspect of the design to deal with, because all the firemen are there on shifts. These shifts are relatively long. And at night, most of these firemen, if they're not out on a call, will be trying to get some sleep. So we have to accommodate their living and sleeping needs in the firehouse. And then finally, in the case of Asbury Park, and I think in the case of many firehouses, there are community uses that we'd like to accommodate too. And in the case of Asbury Park, we've included a large community room where various events in the city of Asbury Park can use the space if they so desire. And because of the lack of community space that's available, we've decided to put a community room into the firehouse. So I don't know if Gary's had any luck with the images. Gary, any further development? I think he's...
We're almost there.
Okay, well, if we get some images, I'll go back and talk about them in a moment. But let's keep going and talk now about the issues of firehouse design. The first issue is you have to house all the fire apparatus. And in the case of Asbury Park, they do not have room in their existing fireplace for their apparatus. In fact, they can't even house half of it inside. So a lot of it gets parked on the grounds, as you probably noticed, around the firehouse in Asbury. For a long time, they were using this public works lot in Allenhurst to store their apparatus, and then they had to go retrieve them from out of town. And so in the new firehouse, which by the way is going to be located on a city-owned site on Memorial Drive, immediately opposite the municipal building on the west side of the railroad tracks. We are going to house all 21 pieces of apparatus in the new building, and we're going to do that by providing 8 what we call apparatus bays. And these apparatus bays will be extremely wide and extremely tall. They will all be 18-foot wide, and as you know, no vehicles are that wide. But the reason that you want wide apparatus bays is that there's a lot of equipment and a lot of maintenance that has to take place on the fire equipment, and this gives the personnel ample room to move about the equipment when it's indoors. And in the wintertime, keeping the fire equipment stocked and everything that has to be done is all done indoors. And in fact, in the new firehouse in Asbury, there won't be extensive aprons. The site isn't big enough. So even the maintenance of the fire vehicles, if it isn't serious, if it's routine maintenance, will be done in the firehouse. And as many of you know, in order to maintain or to work on the engines in a modern truck, you have to lift the cab. So in order to lift the cab tilts back, you need 18-foot clear. So all 8 apparatus bays in the new firehouse will not only be 18-foot wide, but they will be 18-foot clear in height. In addition, you have to be able to support circulation around all the equipment as the firefighters, if they get a call, have to run from the residential portion of the building and access their personal protective equipment and then get on board the fire truck. So we want to have ample room in the firehouse for all of these activities to happen. And you also need an extensive amount of space immediately adjacent to the apparatus bays for what's called PPE, personal protective equipment. Every fireman has a jacket and overalls and boots and helmets and other personal protective equipment that they have to put on when they go on a call. And in fact, in the case of Asbury and most modern fire departments, there are redundant or duplicate personal protective equipment for every firefighter. So there's a lot of storage space required. Because of the site configuration in Asbury Park, we are going to be having the residential portion of the building on the upper floor, on a second floor. And to answer Lois's earlier question, is the fire pole still in effect? We are providing a fire pole so that firemen who wish to use the pole when they get a call will be able to come down from the residential section of the building via the fire pole to the apparatus bay floor. That won't be the only way to get down. There'll be ample stairs to get there. We're also considering running a catwalk across the top of the apparatus bays so that if you're coming from one end of the building to the other, you'll be able to use the catwalk, traverse above the apparatus bay floor, and then use one of a number of set of stairs to get down to the apparatus bay floor and to get to the particular piece of equipment that you'll be utilizing or that you'll be responding to a call in. In addition to the trucks themselves and the personal protective equipment, we have to have room in the firehouse to store both medical and hazardous waste. So there'll be separate dedicated spaces that are monitored and will be able to secure the waste. And then, and I have images for this, but until we get a chance to show you some of this, we'll just talk about it. You also have to have a way to remove all of the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and the vehicle exhaust from the interior apparatus bays. So above all the apparatus bays, there will be an exhaust system with flexible hoses that can be dropped down and attached to all the vehicles so that the vehicles can be run when they're indoors. And some of the maintenance that takes place requires that the vehicles be run indoors. So in order to provide a safe working environment, there'll be drop-down hoses that will be hooked to the exhaust, and that will exhaust all of the vehicular exhaust through the roof of the firehouse. We'll also have overhead connections for power so that we can drop power lines down. There are a lot of things on a fire vehicle and an ambulance and a rescue vehicle that have to be charged. Even though none of the current fire apparatus are electric vehicles, they're all powered by combustion engines, but eventually I'm sure even that will change. But there's a lot of power requirements, so we'll be able to drop power cords on flex cords down to power and charge all the equipment on board the vehicles. And we also have air compressors and air hoses so that we can keep drop air hoses down and keep the tires pressurized and any other pressurized equipment that needs to be there. There'll be hose bibs throughout because the fire vehicles will require constant cleaning. In fact, I think most firemen take pride in the appearance of their vehicles. So there'll be ample opportunity to wash the vehicles. And because in Asbury Park, there won't be an apron where we can take the vehicles outside and wash them. They'll be washed inside. So we're going to have floor drains in the building that will facilitate washing of the vehicles while they're in the apparatus phase. It's also interesting to note that we're going to provide a lot of lighting in the apparatus phase, and that there's a aversion to using fluorescent light. And the reason that we don't use fluorescent light is that fluorescent light produces UV rays, which actually breaks down the fibers in the personal protective equipment. So we'll be using in the new firehouse only LED light. But in an older firehouse, you'll see that there's very little fluorescent light. Most of the light is incandescent for that reason. There are also adjacent and to the apparatus bays and separating the apparatus bays from the residential and the business portions of the building, there'll be decontamination areas in the building, because when firemen come back, who knows what they've been exposed to in the field. They have to be washed down and decontaminated, and their equipment has to be washed down. So we have washdown bays for decontaminating equipment, and there are special requirements for how you handle that, the waste and the wastewater from the decontamination process that we'll have to deal with. And then on the ambulance side, on the emergency medical side of the operation, you will have storage needs for both medical supplies, and those medical supplies will include a significant amount of pharmaceuticals, drugs, which obviously have to be stored in a secure location, because obviously we have a potential when drugs are available, that becomes a potential target. So we want to make sure that we have all of the medical and drugs securely locked in medical facilities. And in the case of the Asbury Park Firehouse, we're going to have the drug and medical supply storage immediately adjacent to the ambulance bays, so that after the EMTs come back on a call, they pull the ambulance back into the house. They do whatever decontamination they might need to do, get cleaned up, and then they can immediately restock their vehicles from these storage rooms, which will be located directly adjacent to the bays. And then from a finish perspective, firehouses they're subject to a lot of abuse. Obviously, you have big vehicles in and out. You have a lot of heavy equipment. You have a constant need for washing and decontamination. So all of the finishes in the building have to be such that the building itself can take a relatively high level of abuse and stand up over time. And as with every public building, you usually build a public building for a 50 to 100-year life cycle. And if you think about most of the firehouses, I mean, you can start to think about most public buildings. It's probably not in suburban Ocean Township, which is relatively new, but in most of urban America, almost all of your public buildings, even public schools, end up in service for periods of up to 100 years. So we want to design a building that will be durable. Obviously, the building will be constructed of masonry. In Asbury Park, we're going to be using a reinforced concrete masonry structure with steel trusses above to provide long spans. And we're probably going to utilize a brick veneer on the exterior to give the building, number one, to make it fit into its context adjacent to the municipal building, but also because masonry materials provide long-term durability, and we want the building to last and perform for 50 to 100 years. So in addition to the apparatus, Gary, any luck yet? I guess not. In addition to the apparatus, we have to provide for the residential needs of the firefighters who frequently are on 12 to 18-hour shifts on duty. And when they're on duty, they need a place to rest and sleep whenever they get the opportunity. In the case of Asbury Park and in the case of most new firehouses, we'll be providing individual bunk rooms for each person, each staff member, to have a private room, not a large room, but a private room with a bunk and a desk in it, where they can retreat and rest when they need to. And then adjacent to each of those bunk rooms, the bunk rooms will not be assigned, they'll be communal. In other words, a person on a person on each shift will share rooms so that no one will have their own personal private room, but there will be private storage closets adjacent to the bunk rooms. So 2 or 3 firefighters might use one bunk depending on what shift they're on, but they'll have private lockable storage immediately adjacent to their bunk room. We're also going to have restrooms and shower facilities for the firefighters, and you'll be pleased to know that in Asbury Park, there are several women firefighters nowadays. And this is something new. The old firehouse obviously does not have facilities for the women. It's made very clear to us that we need to make sure that the women have the same facilities as the men do. So in the new firehouse, we'll be having both men's and women's facilities, restrooms, showers, etc. There's also going to be a commercial kitchen. As you know, the shift might have 10 or 8, 10, 12 people on a shift, and they do need to eat. So the firemen will be cooking for themselves, and we will have a commercial kitchen in the building that'll have a commercial kitchen hood, which with fire suppression, of course, because we're in a firehouse, but the hood would have to be suppressed anyway. And we'll have a large dining room so that the entire staff can eat. And as you know, if you watch TV, you know that the firemen generally the shifts eat together. And there'll be a large day room, which place just to lounge and hang out. We're also going to be providing a recreation room so that there'll be a separate place with maybe a pool table or a ping pong table, and an exercise room so that if you want to work out while you're on shift and you're not on a call, you'll have room to work out. And of course, we'll have Wi-Fi in the building so that you'll always have connectivity. Anyone will be able to do whatever they want to do on a laptop because we're obviously going to provide Wi-Fi. And then in addition to the residential, the firehouse also has to serve a training need. And by training, I mean 2 things. I mean, there's classroom instruction. So we will have a classroom type facility in the building called a training room where firemen will be able to go to, firemen and firewomen and EMTs will be able to go to various seminars. They'll have guest speakers. They have regular seminars that they have to attend. And then in addition to that, we're going to be providing a facility that facilitates actual practice. What I mean by that is we're going to be providing a training tower in the building, which is a stair tower of at least 3 stories in height so that the firefighters will be able to practice their operations and moving and hauling hoses upstairs. The stair will have standpipes in it so they can practice making connections to those stairs. And then in the case of the Asbury Park Firehouse, we're going to have the stairs such that there are mezzanines and balconies that overhang into the apparatus space so that there can be ladder drills to access upper floors, all of which can be done indoors. And there can be rappelling drills. If you have to anchor a rope and rappel down the face of a wall, we're going to have a training wall. And I have an image of that to show you, but unfortunately we can't get at the images. And of course, in addition to all that, it's a firehouse, it's a public building, so it'll have to be completely ADA compliant. It obviously will be, and that means every aspect of the building will be accessible. And the building will have to be extraordinarily resilient. And by that I mean, we're going to build a building that will stand up to flood hazard. We're going to build a building that will obviously have emergency power. If the power goes out in the city, the firehouse still has to operate. In fact, you'd think the firehouse might be operational beyond all other facilities in the town. So the buildings have to be completely resilient, able to take a considerable amount of abuse, and able to operate off the grid on their own power if need be. So all of that is what we're seeking to do. I think that's the kind of sums up what we look at as architects. The one thing I haven't mentioned, and this is something that we, as architects, we look to do in any building, not just the firehouse, but we always look to create a building and create a building design that's contextual, that fits into its environment. I mentioned in Asbury Park, we're looking at a brick building. The brick building will probably have 8 very, very large, 14-foot wide by 18-foot high glass doors on the apparatus bays. Those doors will probably, the newer fire apparatus bay doors will pivot sideways. They don't open up like garage doors because of all the overhead utilities and facilities that we have. An overhead door would conflict with that. The newer doors are panelized. They swing to the side. They take up less room. But we will have a brick building. We'll try and bring as much natural light in as we can into the residential areas. We want to have the fire apparatus visible from the street so people can be proud of what they have. And in the case of Asbury Park, in the main lobby, we are also going to accommodate a piece of antique fire apparatus that the district owns. And we're going to put that right in the main lobby. It's very similar to the truck I saw in front of the museum this past weekend, which was one of Massive Fire Company's antique. Asbury has one as well, and they'd like to put it on exhibit, so we'd like to do that as well, and we're going to do that for them. So that's kind of my summary of how we approach the project. I'd be happy to take some questions, and if Gary can get the images up, I'd be more than happy to walk through the images and explain some of these things in terms of images.
Thank you, Steve. We'll take questions. If you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself, and if you'd also like to open up your video, but that's not necessary. So I get to ask the first question. First of all, my reaction is, wow. It's a lot to take in. Do the regulations come from the state, or is there kind of a national rule book of what you should have?
Okay, well, firehouses have to be built to the building codes, number one, and the building codes they're national codes now. They're adopted by each state. New Jersey has adopted the International Building Code, although it writes its own edition because it doesn't like the master format that was created by the International Code Council, which is based in Chicago. So New Jersey, being New Jersey, had to have its own edition. And we will abide, of course, by the International Building Code New Jersey edition, the latest one. They're about to adopt the 2021 edition. But there is also the National Fire Protection Association Standard 1500, which is a national standard which regulates the health, safety, and welfare of firefighters. So we have to abide by all of that as well. And there are all kinds of regulations in there to protect the health and safety of the firefighters. There's also a regulation in there that says that any firefighter should be able to, when responding to a call, to get to from any point in the building to his apparatus within 90 seconds. So you ask whether or not we still have a fire pole. In the case of an upper floor residential unit, the fire pole might be the fastest way for somebody to get to their apparatus. If that apparatus, and we are going to include a fire pole in the Asbury design. But you may also use an upper catwalk and a stair if your apparatus is located in bay number 6 and you have to cross bays number 1 through 5, you'll be able to run across a catwalk over the top of the vehicles in bays 1 through 5 and then drop down a stair into apparatus bay 6. Immediately man your personal protective gear, get in your vehicle, and be out on a call. So yes, there are both state and national standards that we have to abide by.
Okay, thank you very much. Someone in our audience, would you like to unmute and ask the question? Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to ask questions. How many firefighters are on a shift at a time, Steve? Do you know that?
It varies from, in the 10 to 12 range is a normal shift, but there can be more. And that will vary with every fire department. That happens to be Asbury Park. So we're actually going to be accommodating up to 18 people on a shift when you add the officers and some of the managers who might be there as well.
And you did mention that there was a food service there, so there'll be a cook or a chef, and food preparation will go on?
I don't know whether there'll be a chef or whether the firefighter, I have a feeling, my understanding is that the men and the women basically divvy up the cooking responsibilities. And I think the people that are good at it end up being the chef, and the people that are not so good at it don't have a very long career as the chef.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have some other questions? No, your talk was so inclusive, Steve, that it's hard to think of anything that you did not mention. You did talk about hazardous waste. Is this relatively new? When I say relative, I think Ben Franklin started the first fire department in New England, so we didn't have hazardous waste then. This is probably something in the past decade or 20 years, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's been hazardous waste for a while. You end up today with, it's possible or potential that you'll encounter chemical waste. And of course, you have quite a bit of medical waste with the EMTs now. And there are strict requirements for storage and disposal of medical waste as well. And that's a big issue right now is keeping the drugs secure, number one, and then keeping the medical waste safe, number two. So we are putting special facilities adjacent to the EMT bays in the firehouse so that that stuff is readily available. But yeah, that is a bigger problem. And of course, hazardous waste changes over time. I mean, there was hazardous waste back in Ben Franklin's day, although it was probably produced by a horse as opposed to some of the stuff we deal with today. And I should mention, and I didn't have some of the photographs that I wanted to show you, but a lot of the earlier firehouses were 2 stories. And the reason that original firehouses were multi-story, if they were in an urban area, was that typically the first floor housed the apparatus, and the apparatus was primarily horse-drawn. So the first floor often also housed the stables. And so in order to keep the residents, the firemen, separate from the horses, the residential portion of the building was placed up above, and the easiest way to get down was via the fire pole. But in olden times, going back to Ben Franklin's time, you not only had to get your apparatus ready, but you had to hitch your horses to it and then roll it out of the firehouse. So
is there any historical perspective that you could give us? For instance, I'm guessing that there were horses drawing the fire trucks till what, the late 1800s, early 1900s?
Yeah, the late 1800s, the early 1900s are when everything got to be, when cars became prevalent, combustion engine driven fire vehicles became prevalent. It all happened at the same time. So there, yeah, the interesting thing in firehouse design, and I had images to go through this, but up until World War II, firehouses were generally seen, as were most civic buildings, as relatively important structures. And something happened in this country after the war where everybody, number one, we were having phenomenal growth and things had to get built dramatically faster. We had the interstate highways, we had the growth of suburbia, and instead of a lot of these very ornate, mostly urban, but very ornate and architecturally significant urban firehouses that we had constructed in this country up through the 1940s, you suddenly had generally speaking, a much lower quality firehouse erected in a suburban area because the need was there, the money wasn't, and the operational motif was get something built quickly to house our new fire apparatus. But oh, by the way, we're not going to build a Victorian building like we would have in the middle of a city back in 1920, because that's just the way. And it's not only firehouses that suffered immediately after the war. It's almost all civic buildings or municipal buildings. The quality of construction in America during the 50s and 60s was relatively low compared to the quality that we had been used to prior to that. And I spent a good portion of my career designing public schools. And when we were asked to renovate schools, the first thing I would tell client school districts is I'd say, I'd rather renovate your 1920 building than your 1950 building, because your 1920 building, I can tell you right now, has better bones than your 1950s building. And if we renovate it, you're going to get a longer life out of it than you will out of the 1950s building, which probably isn't of the same quality in terms of construction.
I know the book that we shared had some interesting pictures of early firehouses, and they were quite beautiful with gargoyles and things of architectural interest.
I had some images to show of some Victorian firehouses, some early colonial firehouses in Philadelphia, some Richardson Romanesque firehouses in Boston that were very, very unique and civic monuments. And the firehouse was almost the center. It wasn't quite the center of a city, but the center of the neighborhood, because firehouses were often, dispersed around the city in neighborhoods. And then, when we got into suburbia, things changed. Things became much lower. Instead of being vertical, urban buildings, things became horizontally developed. And you can see it the same here in town. You look at the new Wanamassa Firehouse, which is a fine firehouse, but it's a single-story apparatus bay. And one thing I should mention is that one feature, and I had images to show this, one feature that was prevalent in firehouses up through the 1970s even were hose drying racks, because the original fire hoses were all made of cotton and cotton or cotton fiber filaments, and they had to be dried or they would get moldy. Whoops.
So I said,
Excuse me, we're hearing some background noise, Paul.
yeah, well,
Are we ready for pictures?
no, here's, how do I tell this question? I have to
Say it, you're on.
Okay, there's a question here that came from the audience. Are there any plans for the existing site?
In Asbury Park?
Yes.
You know what? I bet if you asked 10 people in Asbury Park, they'd all have an idea, but not that we're aware of. We are not involved at all in deciding what's going to happen to the existing site.
All right, I have another question. I believe that Asbury Park is involved in probably in ocean safety and stuff like that. Do they have a boat or anything like that?
They do have a boat. They have a boat and it's on a trailer, and we are accommodating both the boat and the trailer in the new facility.
Because I remember years ago, there was a fireman in Asbury Park, Howard Rowland, and he used to test all the lifeguards on the beaches. I mean, not just Asbury Park. I think he went from Avon to Long Branch, and when you saw Howard Rowland coming down to the beach, you know you were in trouble, because he went out and basically he tried to drown you. And you better be pretty good or you weren't a lifeguard anymore.
Well, yeah, they do have a boat. They do have a water rescue unit. They do practice water rescues. And we are going to accommodate that in the new facility as well.
Okay. Now, do they have, they must have a massive backup generator plan for this whole thing, I would think.
Well, we have not sized the generator yet because we don't know what the actual load is going to be, but the entire building will be powered by emergency power. So the generator will be sized for the actual load in the building.
Okay. All right. Gary is here with me. His machine got locked up, and if he just does anything with it, it'll shut everything down. So he's down here. I don't know. I guess we can't do the image.
No, we can't do the image. My machine is totally locked up.
That's totally locked up. So
Yeah,
unfortunately, we're going to miss the images.
If somebody if Gary wants to try to give it back, I'll try again, but I don't know why I can't.
Can you
Email it back to him?
are you talking about emailing it back to you?
Oh, no. Hold on one second. Hold on. Let me see.
I did see a little sample of the images, and they're wonderful. I don't
Try and give me the images right now, Gary.
Can you do anything?
I don't know. Let me do it.
He's gonna see. He's gonna go upstairs and see if he can do it on his machine. He's afraid that if he changes something there, that it'll just shut everything down.
Okay.
All right. He's gonna try that.
Well, in case he
it?
does shut everything down, Steve, I want to say this has really been fascinating. It's
Fascinating.
so complex. I can't imagine where you and your team begin with these designs, but you've built many buildings. Are there some that you would like to talk about that are relatively local?
Well, as I said, this is actually the first firehouse I've been involved in my 42 years of doing this. Lately, our office has been extremely involved in doing multifamily housing, mid-rise multifamily housing. And many of you probably are aware of the new development, a lot of the new development on the Long Branch oceanfront. And I'm proud to say we were the architects for both Pier Village and the South Beach Towers, which are on the Long Branch oceanfront. We're currently working on 3 new towers along the oceanfront. They'll be the final 3 in the Oceanfront South redevelopment zone in Long Branch. But we've been very involved doing that type of work lately. We're doing several other mid-rise multifamily projects in East Brunswick as well. We're doing several synagogues. We're doing several schools. We tend to do a little bit of everything in our office. We are not specialists. We enjoy the opportunity to do different types of buildings. We also do a lot of single-family custom residential work, and we like to do that because we like, as architects, we like to be able to change scales and work at a house one time, and then when you finish that, maybe you're working on a high-rise the next time. And I think that keeps everybody a little happier. It certainly keeps the juices flowing from a design perspective when you get to change scales a lot, work on different types of buildings. But again, like I said, this is our first firehouse, so we're enjoying the research. We're enjoying learning about it. As I said, because we are not experts, we have a consultant who is an expert that is collaborating with us. And that's the way we would approach any type of building that we don't necessarily consider ourselves expert in, is we would get consultants to collaborate. And so we make sure that we cover all the bases.
Were you able to speak with firefighters and ask them what their needs were?
Oh yeah, we meet with the chief and all his staff in Asbury Park regularly, and in fact we have produced. We're on scheme 5A. We've produced about 10 different design schemes for them so far, where we are every time we produce a new scheme, we all review it. They comment on it, and then we try to refine our design based on the input we're getting from all parties, from them, from the engineers. The site that we have to work with has a lot of constraints, and we're also working with the municipal engineer in Asbury Park, trying to overcome some of those constraints. If we had our way, we'd like to have a much larger site. I think every fire chief in America would love to have drive-through bays where you didn't have to back the vehicles in. You could drive in one end and come out the other. And in suburbia, that's the way most new firehouses are being built today. We don't have that luxury in Asbury Park. The chief and I we've been at this since about 2013, I believe, 7, 8 years, trying to find a site in Asbury Park that would work for a firehouse. And after not really finding a good site, it was determined by the city that they would utilize the city-owned property immediately behind the municipal building, even though it does present some significant constraints. One thing you don't think of is that one of the sites we looked at in Asbury Park was on Langford Avenue. But Langford Avenue, I don't know if you're familiar with it, on the west side of Asbury Park, has an extremely high crown in the road. In fact, the crown is so high that we determined that we wouldn't be able to back the ladder truck in off the street without it grounding out. So the site on Langford Avenue was not pursued because of the crown of the road, and we would have had to rebuild a portion of Langford Avenue in order to get the fire apparatus in and out of the firehouse. Another thing, though, that we did look at, and it's very important since Asbury has only one firehouse location and all the apparatus is stored and responds from one location, is that we had to stay basically centered in the city with our site selection so that they would have the response times that they needed Had we moved to the east or further to the west, they wouldn't have had the appropriate response times. So we had to pick a site that was nearly, essentially central to the whole city.
Steve, I see pictures now. Do you see them on your screen? Gary has the pictures up.
Hold on, let me go back there and see what he's got.
Yes.
Does Gary have them up?
Yes, he does. There's a
All right,
lovely.
Gary, can you back up?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're in alphabetical order, so.
All right, well then I'll just describe what you're seeing, and they won't be in the order that I was going to explain them. But what you're looking at here is a courthouse, is a fire station that was built in Cortland, New York. And the reason I included this image, obviously you can see it's a Richardson Romanesque and Victorian hybrid. It's very ornate. And the building was built in 1914. But in 1977, in Cortland, New York, there was a movement to build a new firehouse. They determined that this building was obsolete. But because of the quality of the building, they decided that instead of building a new firehouse, they would renovate their existing building. And they actually did that and kept this as their main fire station. Can we get, and you can see that the apparatus is on the lower floors, obviously, but then there are 2 floors above that, where obviously the residential portions of the building are above. This is a fire station in Boston, Massachusetts. It was designed in 1888 by H.H. Richardson. It's a Richardson Romanesque building. You can see the arches. This is all masonry, obviously. But the reason I included this image is to show that how firehouses were generally built in the style that was prevalent at the time. And in Boston, in the early 1900s, H.H. Richardson, he was the king. Everybody thought if you had an H.H. Richardson building, that was it. So here it is. The firehouse was built that way as well. This is a very interesting building. This is fire station number 4 in Columbus, Indiana. And the reason I included this, it's sort of not in a positive way, but I included this because this was one of the first what's considered modern firehouses. It was designed by Robert Venturi. I don't know if many of you know the architect Robert Venturi, but Robert wrote one of the most controversial architectural books in the history of American architecture called Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. And Columbus, Indiana is a very interesting town. Columbus, Indiana is a living architectural museum. If you ever want to take a ride and you're interested in architecture, it's the home of Cummins Diesel Engine Company. And the Miller family, which owned Cummins Diesel Engine, back in the 1950s, decided that they would pay the architectural commissions for any architect, any building that you wanted to build in Columbus, Indiana, as long as you selected the architect from the list of the top 20 architects in the world. And as a result of that, the Cummins Diesel Engine Company paid architectural commissions for every well-known architect to come into town and create a building, and every type of building. There's everything: schools, offices, municipal buildings, churches, libraries. And it's like a living museum of architecture from 1970 through 2000. And Robert Venturi was one of the pioneers of modern architecture and postmodern architecture. And he created this building to say a firehouse doesn't have to be what everybody thinks it has to look like. A firehouse can be anything you want. He did include a hose drying rack because he thought that was one of the indicative features that said, hey, this is a firehouse. And if you notice, the doors at the bottom directly under the number 4 go directly into the hose drying rack, so you could access the hoses. There's only 2 apparatus bays, although in this case there is room, and they're drive-through bays. You can see where the trucks could come in one end and drive right out the other. In this case, it's only 1 story. On the left side of the building, you have the business and the residential component, and the right side of the building housed the apparatus. But that's why I included this building in here. This is the vintage, let me just get the date right here. 1967, this was done. And this kind of led to the, this was going to be my opening slide. And my point here was a firehouse, all it has to do is house the apparatus. And if you have one piece of apparatus, as is the case in this rural town in California, and you have a volunteer fire company that doesn't reside at the firehouse, this is your firehouse. The apparatus is in there. The the volunteers respond from afar. They roll the apparatus out of here. And in this sense, the firehouse is nothing more than an enclosure to house the apparatus, the single fire truck. That's why I included this image. This is actually the head house in Philadelphia. It dates back to 1804, but it shows this was a firehouse where the fire apparatus was horse-drawn, came out the central gate. You had a paddock in the back of the building. But my point here was that this was done in the American colonial style, which was prevalent in Old City, Philadelphia in the early 1800s. And then you got into a modern firehouse. This is a firehouse in San Francisco, California, which is completely different than, it's a two-story firehouse, much like we're doing in Asbury Park. You can see the apparatus bays are on the lower floor, the support, and you can see on the extreme left, you see the personal protective equipment hanging in the wall on the left. And then in the upper portion of the firehouse, a completely modern look. This is obviously these are paid firemen. They reside in the building when they're on shift, and they're housed in the glass portion of the firehouse up above. So from the older styles to a completely modern building. There is a floor plan. Here's a floor plan of a modern suburban firehouse. I don't have the cursor, but if you look in the center, you can see there are 5 apparatus bays. Those apparatus bays are drive-through. There you go. You might be able to put, because of the depth of these bays, 2 vehicles in each bay. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see in the center of this frame, you can see the bunk rooms. To the right of the bunk rooms, there are facilities for both men and women, restrooms and showers. You're now in the kitchen area. The cursor drops down to a kitchen and a day room. Now you're in a classroom, a training area. And at the very front of the building, you have the offices for the fire administrators. At the rear of the building, you have a community room and other practice rooms. And on the right-hand side, you'll notice that you'll see those 5 squares. Those are actually 5 plans. They actually, that tower that you see at the rear of the building is a stair tower that goes up 5 stories. And that 5-story stair tower is there for the firemen to practice manipulating their equipment in stairs in multi-story urban buildings. You'll then notice down below, there are 2 other levels, the 2nd and 3rd floor. They open out into the first apparatus bay as mezzanines. And there's an image coming up where you'll see what that looks like. But that provides an opportunity for the firemen to practice with ladders and ropes and rappelling and things inside their building. They can run drills. This is a rural firehouse. This one is in Proctorsville, Vermont, was constructed in 1870. And my point here was that whereas in urban areas, the firehouses definitely had an architectural style that was indicative of the current architectural style that was in vogue at the time, in rural areas, the buildings were often much simpler and reflected the type of construction that was prevalent in the area. In this case, a very simple 2-story, 2.5-story clapboard building with 2 apparatus bays. And again, the distinguishing feature being the hose drying tower, which was in the rear of the apparatus bay. So after they come back, if the hoses were wet, they would pull them out of the trucks and hang them vertically to let them dry in the air so that they wouldn't get moldy because they were cotton. Same one. Okay, go back one. Go back one right there, Gary, right there. This is a view of a modern apparatus bay. You can see some of the things I talked about earlier. Number one, you can see the clear height that's available. You can see the hoses coming down from the exhaust system. Those could be connected to the truck so that they could run when they're indoors. You'll see power coming down from above. We're going to have the same situation in Asbury Park, where you'll be able to have power drop down on power cords. And this bay is large enough to facilitate maintenance, cleaning, anything you need to do of the apparatus while it's indoors. You'll also notice the doors here. If you look to the left of the screen, those are the sectional doors. Most of the larger fire bay apparatus doors are no longer overhead doors. and we're going to be using sectional doors like this in Asbury Park. They actually pivot to the side. They don't take up very much room, and they don't interfere with all of the overhead mechanical equipment and electrical supply equipment that's above the bays. And this image is an image of an antique truck, which this fire company obviously wants to keep on exhibit. And as I told you, in the lobby of the new Asbury Park Firehouse, we are, budget permitting, we are planning to have enough space to exhibit their antique vehicle as well, which will sit right in the main lobby in front of a glass wall. So it'll be on view from anyone running down Memorial Drive will be able to see it. Anyone coming into the building will be able to admire the old antique piece of apparatus.
That's all that I have on here.
Okay, there are a couple more, but I guess that's fine. At least we got to look at some of them.
Well, thank you, Gary, for helping out and getting all these images on the screen. And Steve, you say you're not an expert, but from what I've just heard, you are indeed an expert. I didn't realize how complicated and how sophisticated the modern firehouse is. But I have a question about that. I see different words, firehouse or fire station. What is the correct terminology?
Well, we're calling Asbury Park a fire station. And to be honest, I don't know what the actual distinction is. I think fire station is more in vogue than firehouse.
Okay.
I think there's a lot more. I think the old image of firehouse was your firefighters lived upstairs, the vehicle was downstairs, and that was it. But there's a lot more going on now in terms of training, in terms of outreach to the community, in terms of fire prevention programs that are run out of the fire station. So I think fire station is the more contemporary description.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to thank you once again. You can't hear our applause, but applause to you. You were very thorough, and I can speak, I think, for everyone. It was extremely enjoyable and informative. And now I'll turn this back to Paul.
Okay, I don't see myself on a picture, but I would imagine that I'm there.
You're
And
there,
I'd
Paul. You're
I
there.
would like to thank everybody for coming and for hanging in there with us, and especially Steve. Great presentation. We really do appreciate it. It's certainly apropos when we do the Wanamassa Fire Company's 100th anniversary to have someone talk about the architecture of firehouses, and it was very, very enlightening. So once again, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Lois, for putting these programs together. And thank you for everybody that hung in there, all the participants. And we really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have some other things, resume presentations in the future. So once again, thank you and good evening.
Thank you.